Are you tempted to get an electric car? If not, then why not? What are your worries about it? Or if you have switched to an electric car already, do you love it? Or was it the worst decision you've ever made? Quentin Wilson is a motoring journalist and transport campaigner. Hello to you, Quentin.
Hello, Jonathan.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for coming on. So you've already got an electric car, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been driving them since, I guess, about 2009. I must have done 150,000 miles on battery power alone.
Okay, so if you open the newspapers on any given day, you will be bombarded with stories about how rubbish they are, how they lose their value, how the batteries, they completely run out of life after a couple of years, and how everyone that's ever bought one thinks it's the worst decision they've ever made. How do you respond to those negative stories?
Well, you've got to remember, Jonathan, those stories are written by journalists who have never driven or owned an electric car, and they're clickbait. So, the electric car debate has become polarised between left and right, and the government wants us to kind of, just not buy electric cars because, it's no good and they're too expensive. And you've got this big anti-EV narrative going on, which if you talk to any electric car driver will say it's utter nonsense. So things like the batteries don't last. Teslas are coming around now with 400,000 miles on their original batteries. And most experts say that a battery in an electric car will outlast the chassis of the car. They're not wearing out roads. They're not causing multi-story bridges and things to collapse. And the running costs are much, much lower than fuel. So just remember that these stories you read, which I think are putting people off buying electric cars, are broadly speaking nonsense.
Some of them, though, of course, are written by people that have had electric cars. And in fact, there are some prominent people that sometimes take to various YouTube channels whose sole premise for having a YouTube channel seems to be, I bought an electric car and it was the worst decision I've ever made. Please don't make the same mistake as me. Why would they be doing that if they're so good?
There's one particular one who I won't name and give him the oxygen, who bought a Porsche Taycan at a high price, and it's depreciated. But then, lots of big, expensive cars depreciate. And the amount of people who are saying, I don't want my electric car, I want to go back to combustion, is very, very small. All the stats show us that the satisfaction rate on electric cars is between 80 to 90%. There's a million people out there, Jonathan, who have folded electric cars happily into their life. You see them strobing up and down the motorways. London is full of them. And these are the voices we don't hear. And I always say, if you really want to know the unvarnished truth about running an electric car, talk to someone who's owned one for a substantial period of time, and not these clickbaity stories and, what's the word I'm looking for, nut jobs on YouTube.
Right, so well, that's one way of putting it. So in terms of the negatives, and I want to have a grown-up conversation, and I also drive an electric car, so, I also know what I'm talking about when it comes to my experience of my electric car. But there are problems, aren't there? There are negatives. I mean, for example, the infrastructure out there, although it's getting better, it's still not as good as it should be. There's still pockets of the country where if you pull into a car park, there's either a charger that doesn't work or a charger that is already got a car charging up using it, and there's a queue to use it because there aren't enough of them. There are problems with the infrastructure. Surely you would accept that.
Sure, absolutely, Jonathan. And we need many minimum of chargers. I mean, China have got 2.7 million chargers, and we've got, 59,000 here in the UK. So I would be absolutely in agreement that we need to really, really push this. And it's getting better. I mean, the amount of chargers has increased, I think, 40% this year compared to last. But I'm pushing government. I have a campaign group called Fair Charge, where we talk to ministers and peers and politicians and just get them to understand that we really do need to do this. And I'm sitting here at an Instavolt charging site just outside Heathrow Airport. And, there are big 350 kilowatt chargers that you use a credit card on that are really interesting and easy to use. And that's what we need. We need much more of this all over the country.
In terms of the range, that's the other thing that doesn't affect me. My car has a range of, in the summer, I get just over 200 miles out of my car. And in the winter, at the moment, I'm getting about 175, 178. Now, for me, that's absolutely fine. It's absolutely sufficient. I don't do very long journeys. I quite often will drive from Hertfordshire down into London. I'll drive from Hertfordshire up to Cambridge. There's no issue whatsoever. I've never had the need to stop and charge midway on a journey. I've never done a journey long enough in that car. However, there are other people out there who do longer journeys on a regular basis. Would you accept that if you are someone that, for example, is driving from London up to Manchester 6 or 7 times a year, then maybe they would want to think long and hard before getting an electric car, because it's going to be hassle every time they do it?
Jonathan, I'd be the very first to say that electric cars aren't for everybody. But as you say, you can do these long journeys, and I've driven to France 780 miles on 3 charges. And I'm sitting here, as I say, in this charging station. I've got 236 miles now in my battery, and I drove down from London this morning, and I'll be able to drive back. So while you have a cup of coffee and a Burger King, your car charges up in 20 minutes, and I can do my emails. So it's a kind of behavioural change. But yes, for people who do these big epic mileages, stick to your diesel.
And one final question for you, and it's something that I would like you to address, because it's already coming through on comments that are appearing on my screen here. There are those who say, look, electric cars, this is the Betamax of the transport world. It's fleeting technology, and actually where it's really at is hydrogen power. How do you respond to that?
Okay, now look, this is the biggest myth of all, Jonathan. I mean, hydrogen, if you think developing an EV charging network is difficult, you try doing it for hydrogen with high pressure, low temperature piping, the difficulty of hydrogen just evaporating, and the fact that it's about between 10 and 14 quid a kilogram right now, which means that to fill your car up would cost you £250. Shell have closed all their hydrogen filling stations here and in California and San Francisco. There are only 2 cars you can buy in the UK that are hydrogen. It's just too expensive for passenger cars. It will not, most experts say, absolutely happen. And it's totally inefficient. It takes 5 times more electricity to produce green hydrogen at huge cost than it is to produce electricity. So it's a kind of thing that the fossil fuel industry puts out to distract us from electricity, because they think that they can use the existing infrastructure for hydrogen. But trust me, for heavy goods vehicles, for marine, and maybe even short-haul aviation, it has possibilities. But every expert I've ever talked to say that hydrogen for passenger cars, too expensive.
Good to talk to you, Quentin. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Quentin Wilson is a motoring journalist and transport campaigner.